I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who kept secrets from her husband. But then again, I never thought my husband would try to sell my mother's restaurant without telling me. My name is Catherine Morrison. I'm 62 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've been married to Robert, a man I met at a business networking event 3 years after my first husband passed away. Robert swept me off my feet with his charm, his business acumen, and his genuine interest in my life. Or so I thought. I grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown. My mother emigrated from Guangzhou in the 70s, and she worked her way from washing dishes to eventually owning Golden Lotus, a small dim sum restaurant that became a neighborhood institution. She taught me everything: how to fold dumplings, how to read people, how to survive. And yes, she taught me Cantonese. Not just kitchen Cantonese, but fluent, conversational Cantonese. When I married Robert, my daughters were already grown with families of their own. Robert had been divorced for years, no children. He said he was ready to settle down, to be part of a real family. I was lonely. The restaurant kept me busy. But it wasn't the same as having someone to share your life with. Robert seemed perfect. Successful real estate investor, well-traveled, cultured. He'd eat at Golden Lotus 3 times a week, always complimenting the food, asking about the recipes, showing genuine interest in the business. What I didn't tell Robert was that I spoke Cantonese. It just never came up. He knew my mother was Chinese, knew I ran her restaurant, but he assumed, like most people do, that I was just the American-born daughter who inherited the business. He'd never asked. And after a while, it felt like mentioning it would be strange. Like, why bring it up now? Besides, he barely showed interest in anything that didn't relate to his deals. Golden Lotus had been struggling for the past 2 years. Not badly, we were still profitable, but the neighborhood was changing. The landlord had raised the rent twice. Younger, hipper restaurants were opening up. I was tired. Some days I thought about selling, about finally retiring, maybe traveling with Robert like he always suggested. But every time I stood in that kitchen, I saw my mother's hands showing me how to pleat a dumpling. I heard her voice telling me stories in Cantonese about her village, about coming to America with nothing. I couldn't just let it go. Robert started talking about the restaurant differently about 6 months ago. He'd say things like, "You work too hard, Catherine. You should be enjoying life at your age." Or, "This neighborhood is going to gentrify completely in 5 years. The property value will skyrocket." I'd nod, exhausted from another 14-hour day, not really listening. Then one evening, Robert came home excited. "I have someone who wants to meet you," he said, "a potential investor interested in the property. Just a casual dinner, nothing formal. Tomorrow night at Merchants Exchange." "An investor?" I asked. "Robert, I haven't said I want to sell. Just hear them out," he said, kissing my forehead. "No commitment. But Catherine, sweetheart, you need to think about your future. Our future." The next evening, I put on my best dress, the navy blue one Robert had bought me for Christmas. Merchants Exchange was one of those old San Francisco institutions with white tablecloths and waiters in bow ties. Robert held my hand as we walked in, and for a moment, I felt that warmth I'd felt when we first met. 3 men were already seated at the table. 2 younger men in expensive suits, and an older gentleman, maybe late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. They all stood when we approached. "Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison," the older man said with a slight accent, extending his hand. "I'm Henry Jiang. These are my associates, David Chen and Michael Wu." We shook hands, exchanged pleasantries. I noticed they spoke English, though David and Michael had slight accents that suggested they weren't born here. Henry's English was nearly perfect, with just the faintest British tinge to it. "My wife doesn't really need to be involved in the business details," Robert said as we sat down, and I felt that familiar flush of irritation. "I just wanted her to meet you, put a face to the deal." "Of course," Henry said, smiling at me. "But Mrs. Morrison, it is your restaurant, is it not? Your mother's legacy?" "It is," I said. "Then surely your opinion matters greatly," Henry continued, and I liked him immediately. Robert laughed, a little too loud. "Catherine's more of the creative type. She makes incredible dumplings, but business? That's my department. She trusts me to handle these things." I smiled tightly, my fingers gripping the napkin in my lap. This was Robert's pattern. In meetings, in social situations, he'd subtly diminish me, make me seem like the sweet older wife who was good in the kitchen but not much else. I'd gotten used to it, told myself it didn't matter. The waiter came, took our drink orders. Robert ordered for me without asking, a white wine I didn't particularly like. The property is in an excellent location, Robert continued. Prime real estate. The restaurant business is just holding it back from its potential. Henry nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something in Cantonese to David. Something like, "What do you think of the husband?" David responded, also in Cantonese. "He seems eager. Maybe too eager." I kept my face neutral, reaching for my water glass. Robert didn't even notice. He was too busy launching into his pitch about the neighborhood's development prospects. Michael leaned toward Henry and said in Cantonese, "Does the wife know he's been talking to other developers?" My heart skipped, but I maintained my composure. I took a sip of the wine I didn't want. "I doubt it," Henry replied in Cantonese, his eyes on me. There was something in his look, something assessing. He talks about her like she's furniture. Robert was still going, pulling out papers from his briefcase, pointing to zoning maps and development projections. We could demolish the existing structure, put up a mixed-use building. The numbers are incredible. Demolish. The word hit me like a slap. He wanted to tear down my mother's restaurant. "And your wife is comfortable with this?" Henry asked in English, his tone mild. "Oh, absolutely," Robert said without even looking at me. "She's ready to retire, aren't you, darling? We've talked about traveling, maybe buying a place in Napa. We had never talked about any of that. Not seriously." David said something else in Cantonese. "He doesn't even check with her. Is she even paying attention?" "I think she's smarter than he gives her credit for," Michael replied in Cantonese. I was paying attention. To every word, in both languages. The dinner continued. Courses arrived. Robert dominated the conversation, painting pictures of the development, the profit margins, the timeline. He mentioned figures, sale prices, numbers I'd never heard before, never agreed to. Then, after the main course, Robert excused himself to take a phone call. The moment he left the table, the three men switched entirely to Cantonese. "So, what do you really think?" David asked Henry. "He's trying to sell property he doesn't fully own," Henry said, his voice hard. "He mentioned his wife has a 50% stake from the inheritance, but he talks like the decision is entirely his. Does he think we won't do due diligence?" Michael scoffed. "Worse," Henry said. "He thinks his wife is too stupid to notice or too meek to object. He told me on the phone last week that she'll sign whatever he puts in front of her." The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Not just that Robert was trying to sell without really consulting me, but that he'd told these strangers I was some mindless woman who'd sign away my mother's legacy without question. "I don't like doing business with men who disrespect their families," Henry continued in Cantonese. "If he'll betray his wife this easily, he'll betray us." "Should we end this now?" David asked. "Let's see how it plays out," Henry said. Then he looked directly at me, and I saw it. Recognition. He knew. Somehow, he knew I understood every word. "Mrs. Morrison," Henry said, switching back to English, "you've been very quiet. What do you think about all of this?" Robert was walking back to the table. "Oh, she's fine," he answered for me. "Probably just tired. It's past her usual bedtime." I was 62, not 90. But I said nothing. Not yet. The dinner wrapped up with handshakes and promises to be in touch. In the car ride home, Robert was euphoric. That went perfectly. "Jang is ready to move forward. We could close in 3 months, Catherine. 3 months and we'll have $3 million to split." "$3 million?" I asked quietly. "Well, after my finder's fee and the commission, you'd clear about 1.2, he said casually. "Still, enough to retire on comfortably. My half should have been 1.5 million, even after his fees. He was skimming, and he wasn't even trying to hide it well. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Robert, listening to him snore, and I thought about everything. The casual dismissals, the patronizing comments, the way he'd told those men I'd sign whatever he wanted. 8 years of my life with this man, and I'd been so lonely, so eager for companionship, that I'd ignored all the signs. The next morning, I did what my mother would have done. I started gathering information. I called my lawyer, Janet, who'd handled my first husband's estate. Janet, I need to know exactly what I own and what my rights are. Catherine, is everything okay? I need to know if Robert can sell the restaurant property without my explicit consent. There was a pause. No. You own 50% through your mother's estate. Any sale would require your signature. Why? Is Robert trying to sell? Just being cautious, I said. Can you send me copies of all the deeds and ownership documents? I'll have them to you by tomorrow. Next, I went through Robert's home office while he was at the gym. I found the preliminary agreement he'd drafted with Zhang's company. The numbers matched what he'd told me, but there were other documents. Emails between Robert and at least 4 other development companies. He'd been shopping the property for 8 months, telling each of them that his wife was on board and easy to manage. One email made my blood boil. Robert had written, "The wife is sentimental about the restaurant, but she's getting older and doesn't have the energy to fight. I manage all our finances. She'll sign." I photographed everything with my phone. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my daughters. "Mom, what's wrong?" Jennifer, my oldest, asked immediately. I told them everything. About the dinner, about what I'd overheard, about what I'd found. "That bastard, Sarah," my younger daughter hissed. "Mom, you need to leave him." "I need to be smart about this," I said. "Girls, did I ever tell you I speak Cantonese?" "Wait, what?" Jennifer laughed. "Fluently? Grandma taught me. Robert doesn't know." "Oh, this is going to be good," Sarah said. "Mom, what do you need from us?" "Just your support. And maybe your presence at a meeting I'm planning." 3 days later, I called Henry Zhang's office. His assistant answered in English, but I responded in Cantonese. "Hello, this is Catherine Morrison. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mr. Zhang, without my husband." There was a surprised pause then. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Zhang will be very interested to speak with you. We met at a tea house in Chinatown, just a few blocks from Golden Lotus. Henry arrived with just David, no entourage. When I greeted them in Cantonese, Henry's face broke into a genuine smile. "I knew it," he said in Cantonese. "At the dinner, your eyes. You understood everything." "Every word," I confirmed, sitting down. "And I want you to know, I had no idea Robert was trying to sell the restaurant until that night." We switched to English, and I laid it all out. The documents I'd found, the emails, Robert's deception. Henry listened carefully. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to be honest with you. I never intended to do business with your husband. The moment he spoke about you the way he did, I knew what kind of man he was. I've been in business for 40 years. I never trust a man who betrays his family." "Then why agree to the dinner?" I asked. "I wanted to see if you were really as passive as he claimed," Henry said, "and I wanted to see the restaurant. Your mother's Golden Lotus is a legend in the community, Mrs. Morrison. My own mother used to bring me there in the 80s when I first came to San Francisco." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You ate at Golden Lotus?" "The best hargao I've ever had," he said warmly. "When your husband approached me about buying the property, I looked into the history. Your mother, Mrs. Chen, she was respected. What she built meant something. It still does," I said quietly. "I believe you," Henry said, "which is why I want to make you a different proposal. Not to buy the property, but to invest in the restaurant. Help you modernize, expand, maybe open a second location. Keep the legacy alive, but make it sustainable for the next generation." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely. But it would have to be your decision, your vision. I'm just the investor." He smiled, and perhaps a regular customer again. We talked for 2 hours. About the restaurant, about the neighborhood, about what Golden Lotus could become. David showed me preliminary numbers, projections that were conservative but promising. They'd done their homework. "There's one condition," I said finally. "Robert can't be involved, at all." "I assumed as much," Henry said. "What will you do?" "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "And I'm going to fight for what's mine." That evening, when Robert came home, I had all the documents laid out on the dining table. The ownership papers Janet had sent, the screenshots of his emails, the meeting notes from my conversation with Henry. "Catherine, what is all this?" Robert asked, his voice already defensive. "This is me not signing whatever you put in front of me," I said calmly. His face went red. "You went through my office? You had no right." "I had every right," I cut him off. "You've been trying to sell my mother's restaurant behind my back for 8 months. You told those investors I was too stupid and too old to notice." "I never said." "I heard you, Robert. At the dinner. When you told Henry Jang that I'd sign anything, that I was just tired, past my bedtime, like I'm some doddering old woman." He blinked. "What are you talking about? They spoke English the whole time." "No," I said, feeling a surge of power I hadn't felt in years. "They spoke Cantonese when you left the table. They said you were a man who betrays his family, that they don't do business with people like you. And they were right." The color drained from his face. "You speak fluently," I said. "My mother made sure of it. Funny, in 8 years of marriage, you never once asked about that part of my heritage. You just assumed I was some Americanized daughter who inherited a business I didn't understand." "Catherine, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. I've already consulted with my lawyer. You have no claim on the restaurant. The property is solely mine through my mother's estate. Our marital assets will be divided 50-50, but Golden Lotus isn't part of that equation." "You can't do this," he said, but his voice was weak. "I already have. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. You have until the end of the week to move out." He tried arguing, tried apologizing, tried explaining that he'd only wanted what was best for us, but I was done listening to him talk. I'd spent 8 years listening to him tell me who I was, what I wanted, what I was capable of. I wasn't doing it anymore. The divorce took 6 months. Robert fought for a share of the restaurant, but Janet was ruthless. She presented every email, every document that showed his intent to defraud me. In the end, he walked away with half of our joint savings and the house we'd bought together, which I happily let him have. I never wanted to see it again. Henry's investment group came through. We renovated Golden Lotus, keeping my mother's recipes and the traditional techniques, but updating the dining room, improving the kitchen, training new staff. Henry insisted on installing a small plaque near the entrance, founded by Mrs. Linda Chen, 1982, honoring tradition, embracing tomorrow. My daughters came to the reopening. Jennifer's son, my grandson Marcus, asked if he could learn to make dumplings. I taught him the way my mother taught me, my hands over his, showing him how to pleat the dough just right. "Grandma," he asked in the middle of folding, "Grandpa Robert never came to the restaurant much, did he?" "No, sweetheart, he didn't." "Did he even like dim sum?" I thought about it. I don't think he ever really tried. 6 months after the reopening, Golden Lotus had a waiting list on weekends. Henry brought his family, his grandchildren. We were featured in the Chronicle's food section. A cooking show wanted to film an episode about traditional Cantonese cuisine. I was exhausted most days, but it was the good kind of tired. The kind my mother used to have when she'd come home smelling like ginger and soy sauce, with stories about the customers and their lives. One afternoon, Henry stopped by for tea. We'd become friends, bonding over our shared memories of old Chinatown, the San Francisco that used to be. "I have a confession," he said in Cantonese as we sat in the empty restaurant after lunch service. "Oh?" "That night at Merchants Exchange, I knew you spoke Cantonese before we even switched languages." I set down my teacup. "How?" "My assistant did a background check on your husband. Found out about your mother, about Golden Lotus. I did some asking around in the community. Everyone remembered Mrs. Chen's daughter who could speak better Cantonese than most people born in Guangzhou." He smiled. "I wanted to see if your husband knew. When it became clear he didn't, I wanted to test him, to see if he was the kind of man who'd speak freely, thinking you couldn't understand." "You were testing him," I said slowly. "And he failed spectacularly," Henry said. "I'm sorry if that was manipulative, but Catherine, I've seen too many good people taken advantage of by bad partners. Your mother was kind to my family when we had nothing. I owed it to her memory to make sure her daughter wasn't being cheated." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you. Besides," he added, switching back to English with a grin, "the look on your face when you realized I knew you understood? That was priceless. I thought you were going to drop your water glass." I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in what felt like years. That evening, After the dinner service ended and the staff had gone home, I stood alone in the kitchen. The same kitchen my mother had commanded for 30 years. The same stove she'd taught me to fear and respect. The same counter where she'd shown me how to fold dumplings, telling me stories in Cantonese about her mother and her mother's mother and the village she'd left behind. "I kept it, Mama," I said quietly in Cantonese. "I almost lost it, but I kept it." I thought about Robert, about how close I'd come to signing it all away, how my loneliness, my exhaustion, my desire to be taken care of had almost cost me everything. But I also thought about Henry's words at that first dinner, spoken in Cantonese when he thought I might not understand. "I don't like doing business with men who disrespect their families." My mother used to say, "Listen more than you speak. You learn more that way." She'd been teaching me strategy all along, disguised as language lessons, disguised as cooking techniques, disguised as stories about survival. Robert had assumed that because I was older, because I was a woman, because I seemed tired, that I would be easy to manipulate. He'd never bothered to learn who I really was, what I was capable of, what mattered to me. He'd married a concept, not a person. But I'd learned something too. I'd learned that it's never too late to fight for yourself. That silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's giving people enough rope to hang themselves with their own words. I locked up the restaurant and walked out into the San Francisco night. The neon sign flickered above me. Golden Lotus, my mother's dream, my inheritance, my future. And I was just getting started.